We must sue for peace. In 10 days, we will vote. There is a revolution crouching in the tall grass, waiting like a tiger for the results. No matter which way the vote comes out, there will be a revolutionary challenge to the Republic. It will be conducted by a democracy that has been reduced to a well-organized mob. If President Trump wins, the vote will be challenged. If Vice President Biden wins, the militant mob will press their complaints to the limit while he wrings his hands in despair, shedding crocodile tears. There will be little that the Republic can do to resist. The grievances have been set forth with unmistakable clarity. Police violence, poverty, voting restraints, the economy, the pandemic, biases in education and in housing and employment and earnings. All of these things are well-established complaints. The black people, so steadily exploited and abused by the leaders of the democracy, will be stationed on the front lines. They will take up the BLM protests with even more violence than we have seen already. Once the pattern of assaults is established, others will join them. Angry women, angry homosexuals, angry anyone else. And eventually the Republic will fall. Their complaints will snowball into a vast movement for a constitutional convention, and our system of checks and balances will be forfeited in favor of a streamlined autocracy. Our rights will be compromised, and our voice at the polls will be subjected to the mob on a regular basis. All of the government's powers will be held in the hands of the revolutionary leadership. It will be like a communist regime on steroids. The richest, most powerful nation in the world will be held firmly in an iron grip by our own American Marxists. There is nothing we can do to stop this once the ballots are in. The leaders of this revolution are highly motivated, and they are encouraged by the dominance that they enjoyed over America for more than 19 years following the events in Dallas in 1963, until President Reagan's teflon resistance in 1983. I know these things because I participated in the revolution in 1970, and I joined President Reagan's teflon team in 1983. Along with my revolutionary comrades, we planted 6 bombs in Columbus, Ohio in 1970, just a few months after the Kent State tragedies. I was an Air Force lieutenant, unable to fly and tied to a boring desk job. I had been seeking a transfer to Vietnam, and I had gone to Washington, D.C. to lobby for that transfer when I was rushed and recruited into the underground revolution by a distinguished society of youthful Democrats, the best and the brightest. I had been tapped for that rush by a gaggle of Democratic members of Congress whom I had met by accident in an awkward situation. I have often wondered if the whole thing might not have been a big mistake, but those rich, sophisticated young Democrats rushed me into their revolution, and I went back to Columbus to meet up with my comrades there. By August, we were ready to plant bombs to terrorize Columbus and to force President Nixon to cancel his plans to visit that city just a few days later. We were going to pin the president inside the Beltway, the Washington Beltway, unable to get out into the countryside. In the fury of those bombings, only 2 of the 6 bombs detonated, and by grace, no one was killed. I was seriously injured and was arrested on the scene. I spent 6 years in jail for those 6 bombs, and I kept my silence, faithful to my comrades. And President Nixon visited Columbus just a few days later on schedule. These things are told in my confessions, my testimony, my indictment of the Democratic Party. Those of you who have already read my little book, 1983, The Teflon Tales, already know what happened. I wrote this book 2 years ago, so some of you have already fact-checked the details. This Cultural Revolution taught me many things during my recruitment and indoctrination, as if I were privileged for having been tapped by those congressmen. But after I had been arrested and had served time, I was a pariah, untouchable, and with no future in that revolution. It had been reorganized by the Weather Underground anyway. I was completely out of touch. But I still had been tapped by those big shots in Washington. I knew the inside of the organization. After 7 more years adrift on my own, I contacted the leadership to suggest an alternate method to achieve their goals. Their top management was not happy with me at all. He had big plans of his own. For a few months, I negotiated with others nearby as to how I might fit in with their movement. They lured me away back to Columbus, Ohio, to try out my ideas. I was working underground, unknown to anyone else. Many weeks later, I violated the silence that we keep on those clandestine missions with an unauthorized phone call. I found out that my place of employment had been burned down and the police were looking for me. It was a trap. They had set me up to use me in some way and to get rid of me. Quickly, I arranged for myself to be arrested for a misdemeanor in Columbus, and then I turned in a long list of names to the Reagan administration. Ever since then, I have been a covert member of the Teflon team, known to both friends and enemies, but working below the radar of the press and the public. Those names that I turned in became what are known as assets, and the other people began to handle them. From time to time, I have been able to assert the Teflon case in favor of the Republic, but now those assets are growing old, just like me. Some of them have retired and some have died. It's time for me to go public with the case in order to preserve the Republic for the next generation. Unfortunately, the revolution has been busy since 1983, preparing for another last-ditch effort to dominate America. They will spare nothing to win the game this time. Once their grip is firm, they will destroy all opposition. But in this early hour before the vote, even in this late hour of the campaign season, we still have time to sue for peace. If we can assuage the complaints, or at least relieve those of the black community, we might be able to get to another election cycle with our wounds and divisions healed. The most famous advice from Sun Tzu's ancient art of war was to make peace with your enemy. We should never fight unless we really have to. Lest we lose our republic, we must seek the course of peace. We must disarm the Democrats of their grip on the black community. The time has come to seriously correct the long string of injustices borne by our black American neighbors. For centuries, it has been too easy and too profitable for non-blacks to bully the black people. They have been easy prey, fair game, and it has been an open season on them. That has to stop. The black community has suffered and endured too much unfairness. No one likes a bully. Doesn't it make sense that they have some animosity toward us and some deep-seated distrust? There are white people who still revel in their ability to bully the black folks. How do you think it must feel to see white people doing so well, enjoying the fruits of our great nation, when so many of their black neighbors can barely get by? It feels bad, and we have to find some way to stop the pains that they suffer. Black people have worked hard to build up our country and been rewarded far too little for their contributions. It has been too easy and too profitable to cheat them of what they so richly deserve. They have fought honorably, even heroically, for our country, and returned home from the battlefields to face insults and disgrace. They have built businesses in the slum areas and seen those businesses ruined by drug-driven crime, by their customers being the last to get hired and the first to be fired, and by the urban renewals that leave them stranded, their neighborhoods torn down all around them. please consider this. If your ancestors came to America after the Civil War, you are probably white. But if you were black, your ancestors probably came to America before the Civil War. These millions of descendants of our former slaves are solidly American as any of the rest of us. They deserve to be treated fairly. They have earned the justice and equality that we all owe each other. So, as we sue for peace, we must first address our plea to those black neighbors of ours, our black fellow Americans. They will be the frontline troops of the revolution that threatens our republic. The Democrats will send them into battle on the streets to burn and smash and loot and destroy. The Democrats have cultivated the black community for centuries and have done so by that name Democrat ever since President Andrew Jackson called himself a Democrat in the 1830s. The Republicans fought a civil war to emancipate the black slaves, then passed 3 constitutional amendments to guarantee their freedom, and then enforced 12 years of Reconstruction. But when the Union troops could no longer be maintained in the South, the Southern Democrats cheated the black community of all those gains and then imposed a system of convict labor upon them that was even more cruel than slavery. The Democrats sent forth the Ku Klux Klan to wreak terror on the black people. And then, after Prohibition in the Depression, when the black vote could be bought for a song, the Democrats cut a deal with the Italian gangsters, the bootleggers, to restrict the sale of addictive drugs to the black community only, in order to keep the black man down in both the rural South and in the industrial northern cities. The 24 mafia families that were established in that gentleman's agreement survived intact for 30 years with their assigned territories, from 1933 to 1963. That was when the revolution forced the families to join together at their commission, forming the Cosa Nostra after the events in Dallas. For those 30 years, the black community had suffered the illicit drug trade alone. But even during all of that, the Republicans did away with segregation in the 1950s in such places as Little Rock, Arkansas, and many others. But the Democrats kept buying their votes, even after Dallas, when the drug traffic had been open to every American community, black and white. Still today, the black community suffers under the burden of drugs, broken families, hopelessness, and suicide. The driving force behind all of this is poverty. And that is the kind of peace offering that we must offer them. Some kind of a system of reparations. Not just a check from the government. No, no. That money would soon find its way to the drug lords. That has been the Democratic strategy for decades, to give relief money to the broken families of the black community, and then to recover much of it through the drug trade. Remember, the Democrats sponsored the revolution of the 60s and 70s, while Dr. Timothy Leary was teaching the white community to turn on with LSD-25. The Democrats are well acquainted with organized crime and the drug trade. I know, because I was part of that revolution. And these violent protests across our land are the same type of well-organized crime. To prevent those assaults on our cities, and eventually on our republic, we must offer some kind of olive branch to the black community in some other form of reparations besides a blank check. We must win the black people to the American mainstream. During the Civil War, they were promised 40 acres and a mule. We must set aside something like that, some kind of a marketable territorial claim for our black neighbors. A territory that they can work for themselves and harvest, and that no one else can take away from them. Some kind of legitimate business must belong exclusively to the black community, and it must offer them the way to build up the same level of wealth that most of us hope to enjoy, to own our own homes, to educate our children, to survive the ordinary health difficulties, to be qualified to get credit, to grow a successful business even bigger, and to weather the economic storms that always come our way. We must offer the black community a chance to lift themselves out of poverty so that no one can cheat them of their earnings. 40 acres and a mule today amounts to about $120,000, the price of a young couple's beginner home. That's what every black head of household was promised. There are other things we can offer without merely paying cash. In 2000, I ran for unarmed constable in Washington County, Arkansas, as a Democrat. I had joined the Democrats for a season because I was impressed with President Obama's efforts to establish democracy in the Middle East, continuing the efforts of President Bush to get rid of the dictators in that region. That effort was going well until the unfortunate incident in Benghazi. After Benghazi, we had to deal with ISIS. But in my Washington County, I was troubled by the appearance of the BLM movement. The BLM leaders had stumbled upon a legitimate complaint, and it was renewable every time another black kid got killed. But they were only using it to rally the crowd, to rally the press, and most of all, to rally the vote. The BLM did not seem to offer any solution to the many problems of the black community. Their job was only to complain as loudly as they could to support the Democrats' campaign. So I determined for myself that an unarmed constable in every troubled community might be able to deal with those kids hanging out at night. At least it would be impossible for an unarmed constable to accidentally shoot someone, and you can bet that every kid in that neighborhood would know it. I am sure that the black people in those troubled communities have the courage and determination that they need to step forward and do that kind of work, especially if they have been elected by their own local neighbors. So, there we have an offering of political autonomy, but we still need that territorial business claim for the black community and for no one else. What can we offer them? I keep thinking that the black slaves were the ones who invented barbecue. Sure, they made something wonderful out of those bony ribs and that skinny, tough brisket. Meanwhile, the white folks in the big house were dining on pot roast, prime rib, and choice cut steaks. Does anyone really think that cowboys invented barbecue? As if the cowboys had time for all of that slow roasting out on the range along the cattle trail. Now, we can't risk upsetting an established industry, even though the best barbecue during my childhood in the 1950s was always known to be at some famous place like Uncle Tom's, operated by black people. But that is the kind of territory that the black community deserves to have for itself. What about rice? Rice originated in Africa. How about peanut butter? We all know that George Washington Carver improved it, made it marketable. Do you get the idea? We need to settle upon something that is rightfully and entirely the business territory of the black community. Please think about this. Ask your congressman to think about this. Ask President Trump to think about it and to offer some kind of working relief to the black community. And then, we must each realize how important it is to set aside our own biases against black people. They are not all thieves. They are not all drug addicts. They are not even all Democrats. Many of them are accomplished in the professions, doctors and lawyers, and in the business world, insurance giants, marketing masters, and industrial inventors, and in the arts as well as in the sports. Black people have always done all kinds of work. Give each black individual a measure of respect, at least until that individual discredits himself. Smile, and you might win a valuable friend. Black people are Americans. They've been good Americans, and they have accomplished some wonderful things. Something of the rewards for that work must surely belong to them. Let's figure out what it is. Let's find a way to redeem our black neighbors with a proper sort of reparation for all their centuries of suffering and struggling. Let's look at the very best of them and offer them what they deserve. If you can't do it for what is right and decent, If you can't just do it for God's own sake, at least do it for the Republic. We still have time to save our Republic.